In today's video, we'll witness 5 people who were eaten alive inside their car by deadly animals. From a schoolteacher's bear encounter in Tennessee to a shopkeeper's tiger attack in India. But first, we begin in Florida, where a technician's casual dismissal of warnings would bring him face to face with an alligator. It was June 12, 2016, in Big Cypress National Preserve, Florida. Summer storms had swollen the canals and culverts that cut through the marshland, pushing the water higher than usual. By evening, the preserve had a silence that held danger close beneath the surface. Robert Hale, 42 years old, lived in Miami, where he worked long hours as an HVAC technician. Known among his friends as practical and hard-working, he often sought relief from the city by fishing in rural swamps and canals. He was a lifelong Floridian who grew up around marshes, familiar with the sight of alligators sunning along banks or slipping into water. To him, they were a background hazard, something to respect but not fear. He had once told co-workers that gators never bothered him if he didn't bother them. His habit of ignoring posted warnings came not from arrogance, but from years of believing his experience was enough. That weekend, he had invited his 15-year-old nephew, Daniel, to come along. The boy's parents were hesitant, but Robert reassured them, saying the waters would be calm after the rain, and the fishing would be good. For Robert, the trip was as much about teaching Daniel the pastime he loved as it was about relaxation. He stocked the car with rods, bait, and coolers, and drove west along the Tamiami Trail until the pavement gave way to narrow pull-offs and flooded channels. By late afternoon, they reached a culvert where water flowed steadily under the road. Robert saw movement along the surface, ripples he read as fish, and parked the car at the edge. There had been posted warnings that week. Rangers noted increased gator activity near the culverts, reminding visitors to keep car windows closed and to stay out of the water at dusk. American alligators can reach lengths over 13 feet and weigh nearly 1,000 pounds. Their jaws exert more than 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bone in a single snap. During summer rains, displaced gators often gather near culverts, where fish funnel through in concentrated schools. It is here that they wait in ambush, hidden by dark water, capable of launching their massive bodies in sudden bursts that belie their size. Robert had seen such notices before and paid them little attention. As he leaned across the driver's seat to pour out a bucket of bait water, Daniel muttered that it felt unsafe. Robert brushed it aside, explaining that the fish were more active at this hour, that the spot was perfect for catching them. He left the engine idling, headlights casting pale beams over the water. The sound came without warning, a sudden rush like something heavy striking the side of the car. An 11-foot alligator erupted from the culvert, its jaws locking around Robert's left arm. The force bent the metal door outward with a groan. Robert screamed, half his body yanked through the window. Daniel lunged across the seat, grabbing his uncle's shirt, trying to pull him back inside. Blood smeared across the upholstery as Robert's scalp split against the doorframe when the gator jerked violently backward. His scream broke into ragged gasps. The reptile thrashed, its tail lashing against the side of the car. The boy's grip slipped as the predator dragged Robert fully through the window. The sound of tearing fabric mixed with the wet snap of bone. The gator rolled, a violent corkscrew that wrenched Robert's arm until it tore nearly free from the shoulder. Blood fanned across the surface. Daniel shouted, his hands trembling on the door handle, but he could do nothing as the water turned red beneath the churning mass. Robert's body struck the surface again as the gator twisted. The predator's jaws clamped into his torso, pulling him under. According to Daniel, for a moment, his legs kicked above the waterline, then vanished into the swirl. Daniel pounded the dashboard, yelling for help into the empty preserve. The water stilled within minutes. Daniel called emergency services with shaking fingers, his voice incoherent as he tried to explain what had happened. Rangers and deputies arrived nearly 40 minutes later. They found Daniel in shock, sitting in the car with the engine still idling, the driver's door bent outward. Only partial remains were recovered from the culvert. Search teams located the gator later that night, its size matching Daniel's description. It was euthanized, its stomach examined as procedure. Robert's funeral was held the following week. The casket remained closed, the service attended by family, co-workers, and Daniel's parents, who kept him close and silent. Authorities used the incident as a case study, reiterating long-standing warnings about feeding and approaching gators. The story circulated briefly in local papers, described as another reminder of the risks that come with ignoring posted signs. But even as the massive alligator dragged Robert to his death, just a year later in Tennessee, a schoolteacher would raise her camera toward an approaching black bear with cubs, never realizing the deadly mistake she just made. It was October 14th, 2017, just outside Gatlinburg, Tennessee. The Smoky Mountains were entering their peak season for color. The roadsides were busy with visitors pulling off to take pictures or eat while looking at the view. Behind everything, however, danger did not announce itself until it was too late. Maria Lopez, 39 years old, taught middle school English in Knoxville. She was organized, patient, and known for her calm voice in the classroom. Away from school, she loved small road trips and often convinced her younger sister to ride with her into the Smokies. She had grown up hiking sections of the park and felt comfortable in its boundaries. She kept her car well stocked with snacks, drinks, and leftover food, often stored casually in the back seat. For her, the park was a safe extension of her home state. Scenic, familiar, and manageable. That Saturday, she suggested they drive into the mountains to enjoy the fall colors. She wanted a simple afternoon of sandwiches in the car with her sister while watching the leaves change. She knew bears roamed the area, but she dismissed the hazard as rare. Years of hearing tourist stories about bears breaking into cars hadn't shifted her outlook. She had read warnings posted on park boards, yet she often remarked that such things only happened to careless visitors who left their vehicles unlocked. Her decision to eat lunch in a parked sedan with food spread inside felt ordinary, not reckless, given her perspective. The pull-off they chose sat along a curve where trees opened into a view of slopes. The sedan rested on cracked pavement beside the road, its doors closed but windows partly lowered. In the week leading up to the trip, rangers had logged multiple incidents of bears approaching cars near Gatlinburg. American black bears in the Smokies weigh between 150 and 300 pounds for females, with males growing larger. Though smaller than grizzlies, they are strong climbers and can generate tremendous force with their forelimbs. Their claws, built for tearing into logs for insects, can rip through thin barriers like car doors or windows. By fall, mothers with cubs forage aggressively, driven by instinct to build fat reserves for winter. Food smells, even crumbs, can draw them directly to vehicles. Visitors were reminded repeatedly to store food in sealed containers and never eat inside parked vehicles. Signs were posted at pull-offs, yet Maria parked without hesitation. As they unwrapped their sandwiches, her sister noted claw marks etched faintly into a nearby trash bin, but Maria waved it off. When movement rustled from the tree line, her sister stiffened. Maria, instead of retreating, reached for her phone. She wanted a picture. The bear appeared quickly, a stocky black sow with two small cubs close behind. The cubs scrambled over brush, curious, while their mother walked heavily toward the car, nose lifted to the smell of food. Maria leaned sideways to frame a photo through the open driver's side window. Her sister urged her to roll it up, but Maria lingered, amused by how close the animals had come. The sow moved with a confidence that should have been warning enough. Within seconds, it was at the edge of the pavement. According to the sister, the first strike came as the bear reared and slammed its weight against the glass. The side window exploded inward, scattering shards across the seat. Maria shrieked as the sow's forelimb shot through the gap, claws raking her shoulder. The force pulled her sideways out of the seatbelt. She tried to push back, but the bear dragged her halfway through the frame. Her sister grabbed her legs, bracing against the seat, trying to keep her inside. But blood splattered across the door as claws slashed down her arms. The bear's jaws closed around her chest, biting deep into muscle. Maria's cries cut to a ragged moan as the sow tugged her further out, her head colliding with the metal door frame. The cubs scrambled through the rear window, knocking over bags as they nosed through the back seat. Her sister screamed for help, pulling harder, but the sow shifted its bite, tearing into Maria's throat. Maria's body twitched violently as the bear's weight crushed her against the broken frame. Her sister lost her grip and fell backward across the console. Outside, the sow dragged Maria to the pavement. The sow continued tearing, head jerking side to side, while the cubs nosed through scattered sandwich wrappers. Within minutes, Maria went limp, the gasping replaced by silence. The sow shredded further, consuming tissue with steady bites. Rangers arrived after calls from passing motorists who saw the attack. Noise rounds cracked through the air, driving the animals back into the tree line. The cubs followed reluctantly as the sow dropped her mangled prey. Maria's remains were covered quickly with a tarp, while her sister sat trembling beside the road. The autopsy revealed extensive thoracic and cervical trauma, multiple deep lacerations, and fatal exsanguination consistent with a black bear mauling. Wildlife officers later confirmed that the sow and her cubs were tracked and euthanized days later. They explained publicly that once a bear attacks and feeds on a human, it cannot be relocated. The funeral in Knoxville was private. A closed casket was chosen. Teachers from her school attended quietly, some bringing students who remembered her with respect. Yet even as Maria's tragic encounter served as a reminder of nature's unpredictability, in South Africa's Gauteng province, an engineer from Pretoria lowered his car window, seconds before confidence gave way to Africa's apex predator. It was June 9, 2015, in Gauteng, South Africa. The sky was pale and dry, the afternoon sun flattening the colors of the grasslands. Cars rolled steadily through the safari park's dirt tracks, engines humming low, families pointing at antelope and giraffes from behind glass. On the surface it was calm, but every enclosure carried its own tension, predators pacing unseen in the tall grass, waiting for their chance to move. Daniel Kumalo was 46, an engineer from Pretoria. He spent long hours in an office, but his weekends often carried him out into the veld. He had grown up visiting farms and prided himself on what he called his knowledge of the bush. Friends described him as confident, sometimes too confident, particularly when rules felt restrictive. His cousin, visiting from Durban, had never been on a drive-through safari, and Daniel insisted on showing him the experience firsthand. The trip was casual. They packed a cooler in the trunk and paid for a single car entry that morning. Daniel had been to the park several times and knew its layout, including the enclosures where lions tended to lie in the shade near the road. He wanted to give his cousin a closer view than the average tourist received. He kept his phone and camera ready, telling his cousin that the best pictures often came when people were willing to bend the rules. To him, lowering a window was harmless as long as the vehicle stayed still and the animals looked calm. The lion enclosure stretched wide, with patches of yellow grass and thorn trees scattered along the ridges. Animals that large moved quietly, and most visitors caught only glimpses unless they were patient enough to wait. Little did they know, lions in captivity remain apex predators, even in controlled environments. Adult lionesses weigh between 250 and 350 pounds, their forelimbs strong enough to topple prey larger than themselves. Their jaws exert a bite force capable of crushing bone, and their behavior, though dulled by routine, remains guided by instinct. Safari parks stress window closure because a lion can cover short ground in seconds, using stealth to get close before striking. Other drivers that day had their windows sealed, but Daniel rolled his down part way when he spotted a lioness stretched under the shade of a thorn tree. She lay on her side, ribs lifting slowly, tail flicking against the ground. His cousin raised a phone, encouraged by Daniel's assurance that she was resting. They stopped less than 10 feet from the lioness. The window was lowered halfway, Daniel leaning with his phone extended to frame the shot. His cousin aimed his camera from the passenger seat, voice low but uneasy. A twitch of the lioness's ears was the first sign of change. She lifted her head, eyes fixed on the movement inside the car. Daniel hesitated, then lowered the glass further to get an unobstructed picture, unaware that this mistake would be his last. The strike was instant. The lioness surged forward, closing the distance in a burst of muscle and speed. Her head and forelimb wedged through the open window before Daniel could react. Her jaws clamped across his throat, teeth sinking deep into muscle. His cousin screamed as the animal's claws shredded across Daniel's chest, dragging him partly out of the driver's seat. Daniel's body convulsed as the lioness likely crushed his windpipe. His hands flailed against her muzzle, slick with blood, slipping without effect. His cousin lunged for the opposite door, scrambling out onto the dirt track as the car rocked under the weight of the attack. Rangers nearby shouted and accelerated toward the scene, their vehicles kicking up dust clouds. But the lioness had already pulled Daniel against the window frame, tearing skin and muscle from his abdomen in jerking motions. The cousin's account later described how Daniel's body twitched violently, then slackened as blood poured down the car door and into the sand below. The lioness ignored the approaching vehicles, anchored to her kill. Her claws scraped metal as she pulled, lips peeling back to tear strips of tissue. When Rangers fired, she finally released him, retreating a few steps before collapsing under the gunfire. Daniel's body slumped halfway out the window, his torso torn open, head tilted back at an unnatural angle. Rangers pulled him free, but the injuries left no doubt. Other cars had stopped at a distance, drivers and passengers watching silently, doors locked, windows sealed. The body was wrapped quickly and removed from the enclosure while staff cleared the area. Park officials secured the gates and reinforced their policies that same evening. They stressed again that open windows had been the deciding factor, not the animal's behavior. The safari park later replaced warning signs with larger, more direct notices, and rangers increased patrols inside the predator enclosures. Daniel's funeral in Pretoria was small, attended by close relatives and a few co-workers. The cousin gave a statement privately, saying little beyond the sequence of events. Daniel's overconfidence as a local cost him his life, and in the streets of India, a woman would give fruit offerings from her hand, completely unaware that the primates gathering around her vehicle possessed a savage hunger. It was October 27th, 2013, in Vrindavan, India. Pilgrims crowded the temple lanes, voices carrying over the honking of rickshaws and the shrill calls of street vendors. At the edges of the chaos, troops of monkeys watched from rooftops and power lines, waiting for opportunities that would soon turn deadly. Anjali Patel was 30 years old, living in Delhi and working in a small marketing firm. She was organized, sociable, and often accompanied her parents on religious trips. Vrindavan was familiar to them, a city of temples where offerings of fruit and sweets were customary. That morning, she had driven down with her parents in their compact hatchback, carrying a basket of bananas, apples, and sweets for distribution. She was known in her family for being unafraid of animals, often dismissing what she saw as exaggerations about their dangers. Her motivation was simple. The trip was meant to be devotional and routine, part of her parents' habit of seasonal offerings. Anjali had packed the fruit herself and insisted on bringing extra bananas for distribution at the roadside shrines. She was aware that Vrindavan's monkeys were notorious for snatching food, but she brushed it off, believing that keeping fruit inside the car would prevent trouble. She had been visiting since childhood, after all. The narrow lanes near the temple were crowded with people, motorbikes and cars jostling for space. Around them, macaques sat on awnings and railings, their sharp eyes fixed on bags and baskets, shifting restlessly. Rhesus macaques are medium-sized primates, weighing between 15 and 25 pounds, with sharp canines capable of puncturing bone. They are opportunistic omnivores, adapted to survive in cities by raiding food offerings, trash, and vehicles. In Vrindavan, their behavior had grown more aggressive after years of feeding by locals and tourists. Small groups often banded together, using numbers to overwhelm humans, especially when food was visible or unguarded. Warnings about macaques in Vrindavan were common. Vendors cautioned visitors to keep car windows up, and local police occasionally posted advisories after attacks. Residents spoke of monkeys pulling glasses from faces, tearing bags open, even yanking jewelry from necks. Anjali and her parents had heard it all, but as they paused near the temple entrance, she rolled her window halfway down. She began peeling bananas, intending to set them aside for later. Her father mentioned the risk, but she waved it off, saying they were inside the car and safe. The troop spotted the food instantly. Motorists saw several macaques descended from a nearby wall. Their calls grew sharper as more gathered. In seconds, a dozen surrounded the vehicle, pressing against the side mirrors and roof. The shrieking began as one leapt directly onto her window ledge. Startled but still confident, she pulled the bananas closer, but her reaction triggered the rush. The first monkey launched inside, claws raking across her scalp as it landed on her shoulders. More poured through both open windows, their screeches deafening in the confined space. Her parents yelled, swatting with their hands, but the troop was too fast. One monkey bit deeply into her cheek, tearing skin down toward her jaw. Another clamped onto her ear and ripped part of it away. Her screams filled the street, raw and panicked, drawing the attention of vendors outside. Her father grabbed a stick from the rear floor and swung wildly, but the monkeys clung tighter, teeth sinking into her arms and neck. They shredded fabric and flesh together, tearing strips of skin from her shoulders and chest. Witnesses outside saw the troop cover her like a moving mass. Her head jerked as one bit into her throat. Others tore into the fruit basket, then back into her body, biting and eating pieces of tissue along with the offerings. Vendors hurled stones and bricks at the car, striking several macaques, but the animals only scattered after her body went limp, and her screams stopped. The attack ended abruptly. The monkeys retreated to nearby rooftops, still clutching pieces of fruit, shrieking from above. Her parents remained inside, her father gripping the stick, trembling, his face streaked with scratches. By the time police arrived minutes later after multiple calls from motorists, Anjali was slumped in her seat, lifeless, her clothing torn away, her body marked by deep gouges and bites. The autopsy revealed massive blood loss from deep lacerations and puncture wounds to the face, neck, and upper body, with significant tissue avulsion consistent with multiple animal bites. Cause of death was listed as exsanguination secondary to traumatic injuries inflicted by rhesus macaques. Officials promised action, but little changed beyond temporary patrols near the temples. Her family took her body back to Delhi, where a closed cremation was held. Relatives and neighbors gathered quietly, shaken by the violence of her death. Although Anjali's devotional journey ended in a frenzied primate chaos, just hours away in Bangalore, a shopkeeper drove through a shortcut in the tiger zone, unaware that 400 pounds of striped muscle would be his end. It was March 11th, 2018, in Bannerghatta Biological Park on the outskirts of Bangalore. The morning had passed uneventfully, with families lining up at the entrance for routine safaris. But inside the park, predators often waited, ready to exploit a single lapse in judgment. Arjun Gupta, 41, was a shopkeeper in Bangalore. Known by neighbors for his easy laugh and habit of taking weekend trips with family, he was not reckless in daily life, but prided himself on improvising and getting more out of experiences than others. He was married with a young son, and outings often became opportunities to prove that he could find shortcuts or bargains. For him, visiting Bannerghatta was less about wildlife appreciation than about showing his family something unique. He had chosen this trip partly out of convenience. It was close to the city and required no elaborate planning. Friends had told him that regular tours were safe but unremarkable, with animals often distant or asleep. Arjun disliked the idea of paying for a view from behind bus windows. When he learned that guards sometimes allowed restricted access for a fee, he saw it as an opportunity. His wife was hesitant, but he insisted that it would be more memorable for their son if they drove through the tiger zone in their own car. The setting was deceptively ordinary. The dirt track was hemmed by dry brush, scattered salt trees, and the occasional stretch of tall, yellowing grass. Warnings were posted at the entrance, saying that no private vehicles in tiger zones, and windows to remain closed at all times, and photography only from designated tours. Yet Arjun had waved them aside, slipping the guard a bribe, a practice not uncommon in parts of India, where corruption reports show thousands of park violations overlooked each year. His wife reminded him of these rules as they rolled deeper into the track, but he laughed and said that seeing a tiger up close would be worth the risk. Their son sat in the back, watching nervously as the brush rustled. The Bengal tiger is the largest big cat in India, males weighing up to 500 pounds with a bite force strong enough to puncture bone. Ambush predators, they rely on cover, charging in sudden bursts that can reach 35 miles per hour over short distances. Though accustomed to the presence of vehicles in parks, tigers retain their predatory instincts. A human exposed outside the steel shell of a car is no safer here than in the open forest. Minutes later, a large male emerged from cover, its striped body low and deliberate. The animal moved parallel to the sedan, closing distance with slow, fluid steps. Arjun slowed the car and lowered his window, raising his phone for a closer shot. His wife told him to keep moving, but he was focused on the thrill of capturing an image few tourists obtained. The tiger's gaze fixed on the car, its head lowering as it shifted weight forward. The attack began with explosive force. The tiger lunged onto the hood, its forelegs slamming down with enough weight to rock the vehicle on its suspension. The windshield spiderwebbed under the impact, cracks racing across the glass. Arjun froze for a second, still clutching his phone, before the predator's paw smashed into the side mirror, tearing it away. His wife screamed as the tiger thrust its head against the driver's window, claws scraping metal until the glass shattered in a spray of fragments. The cat seized Arjun in a movement that seemed instantaneous yet deliberate. Its jaws clamped into his abdomen, teeth sinking through flesh and muscle. He was yanked sideways through the window frame, his scalp striking the edge with a wet crack. Blood sprayed across the inside of the car as his body was dragged halfway out. His legs kicked, striking the steering wheel and door, but the tiger pulled harder, twisting its neck as it tore him fully into the open. Witnesses later described the sound as a deep, guttural growl mixed with Arjun's choking screams. On the ground, the tiger shook him violently. His wife tried to pull at his arm, but her hand slipped from the blood, and she collapsed back into the seat, shielding their son. The predator dragged him into the brush. The tiger continued to bite and tear, ignoring the shouts of rangers on the scene who arrived in another vehicle. Rangers fired shots into the air, their engines revving, horns blaring. The tiger growled once more before releasing the body and retreating deeper into cover. Arjun lay motionless, his abdomen open, blood soaking the soil beneath him. His body was recovered minutes later, carried back to the park's service area. The autopsy revealed massive abdominal trauma with evisceration, multiple rib fractures, and fatal blood loss from deep puncture wounds consistent with a tiger attack. Authorities suspended the guard who had allowed the shortcut and reinforced visitor briefings, repeating that windows must remain closed and private cars were not permitted. The funeral in Bangalore was modest, attended by extended family and neighbors. Relatives spoke of his generosity and humor, but little was said about the details of his death. Thanks for watching. If these stories about the fatal danger of animal attacks entertained you, click here for more.